Hey guys, it's Ryan. I've got a new project. Well, I broke my iPad. I dropped it. It fell and hit the parking lot right there on the corner. You can see it in the video. And it shattered the screen. So the home button still works. The digitizer still worked. Everything I could touch it. I could move. Use it and press buttons on the screen. But the problem was that it was still cracked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through how I replaced the screen. So I'm going to speed it up, obviously. Anyway, so I used the heat gun for about 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. And I was just going along the edges so I could loosen up that adhesive. And there weren't any cracks. I mean, the screen was cracked, but there were no openings, so I didn't have to worry about heating up any of the internal elements by direct heat. So the next thing I did was grab the separating tool to separate the screen from the glass, or the glass screen from the rest of the iPad. And it was hot to the touch, and so that was a little bit troubling, but the biggest problem was the fact that once I got pieces separated, they would not come apart because of all the cracks. The glass would break, leaving me with more sections of glass to clean up. I was very careful of the ribbon that attaches the digitizer to the board, and you'll see that once you open it up, but I'll indicate where that is on the screen here, which is on the left side and near the bottom, closer to the home screen or the home button. So on that left side where that arrow is pointing right now. So I had some trouble with the adhesive. It wouldn't come off, so I grabbed the heat gun again and tried to get it opened up. This took quite a while, actually, longer than, so there's a tutorial that I had seen on how to do this, and they said 1 to 2 minutes, and I did about 2.5 the first time around, and then this is another minute or so, and it just took forever, and I could not get it open. I'm not sure if it was the tools I was using, the plastic tools that came with the kit, which were kind of subpar. They were coming open, or not open. They were getting dull, and the screen was not coming open very easily. So as you see, I worked through this for quite a while, and I'm gonna speed it up. This was at 300%. I'm gonna go a little faster just to get through this part where you see me tearing apart the cracked screen on the front of the iPad. So now the video is sped up to 650%. As you can see, spent a lot of time on this. I ended up grabbing a flat-edged X-Acto blade, and I think it's a number 17 if you have an X-Acto razor blade set. And use that to kind of pry some of the glue apart, some of the adhesive in there. I used the guitar pick, I used the triangle separation tool, I used the separation tool, I used everything I could possibly think of. There you see I pulled out a piece of the bezel because it was so stuck to it that it just wasn't coming apart, and now I'm just chipping away shards and pieces of glass. I did have glasses on. I didn't have safety glasses on, and obviously I didn't have any gloves on, so there is that to be concerned about when you have broken pieces of glass everywhere that you're trying to pull apart. So I just kept going at this. Overall, I think that this portion of the taking apart the screen took a total of about a half an hour. So be prepared, it's not going to be a quick job. All right, the moment of truth. I was able to separate the digitizer and laid it over to the side, and then I could begin cleaning up and taking care of the ribbons that are attached to the home button there, and also to the digitizer itself. But the first problem was there was still a lot of adhesive stuck to the iPad, and there's the ribbon. I pointed to it. So time to begin the cleanup phase. With that, I grabbed my straight-edged X-Acto knife. Again, that's a number 17. Just be careful of all of the components when you're pulling off the shards of glass that you may have and the adhesive. Also, as you can see, what I did in a lot of cases was I kind of pressed, but then instead of just shoving, I kind of vibrated the X-Acto knife back and forth so that it would break up the pieces without it, shoving so hard that it would break into a component or stick into my finger or something like that. So I'm just working it back and forth to try and loosen up that adhesive, because at this point it's so dangerous to cut. If you had the digitizer or the pieces and it wasn't broken, you were just taking it apart to get to something else, you would absolutely want to be more careful than I was. In my case, as you can see, everything was broken on the outside. The digitizer was all shattered. So the glass and everything just needed to be removed out of the way. I did make the mistake of pulling apart some of the bezel, so that had to be cleaned up also out of the way. So for the next steps, I put on some nitrile gloves, and I also grabbed a can of compressed air so I could blow away the shards of glass and the pieces that were stuck or would have been stuck. I didn't want to leave fingerprints on the screen because I knew I was going to be possibly touching it when I got the screws out. And so I grabbed the Phillips head screwdriver and went around. There are 4 screws, these 3 on the outside, and then one that is right below the ribbon for the home screen. After that, I grabbed the spudger, I think is what it's called. It's one of the separating tools kind of thing, and got that underneath the LCD screen so that I could pick it up and move that out of the way. And then I was very careful. I wanted to lay it over onto the screen, but then I remembered, because I looked at it, that the back of the screen, the digitizer, was covered with glue or with adhesive, and I needed to get that ribbon unconnected, and in order to do that I needed 2 hands. So I grabbed just whatever I had nearby that was smooth, and in that case it was a piece of foam core board, and I did that so it wouldn't attach the broken pieces of glue and digitizer to the LCD screen. Next, I used the spudger and I tried to pull up the tape. There's some tape that covers up the connection of the ribbon from the LCD screen to its connection, and that wasn't working so well with the spudger, so I ended up going with that X-Acto knife again with the number 17, the flat end blade. Had to clean it off because it had all that junk from the adhesive, and so I just pulled that piece of tape up very, very gently with that razor blade. I didn't want to touch anything. I didn't want to cut anything accidentally, so I got a piece loosed, and then I was able to grab that with my fingers and pull the tape up out of the way. Then I grabbed the spudger and was able to pull the connector stop. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, it's the latch that holds down the connection into the vertical position so that I could move the ribbon out of the way and therefore get the LCD screen out of the way, and I could keep working on disassembly. So before tackling the digitizer ribbon, I cleaned up the rest of the area, And before I get to the digitizer ribbons, I had to move the LCD out of the way. I just set it over on a shelf and it was fine. Next, I knew that the LCD ribbon came into that connector, and that was covered also by tape, and it was gonna have to come off with that razor blade again. So clean that off and show you how that happened. So I first pulled the tape off again with that X-Acto knife and just was careful with it not to touch anything. And again, I had to get that out of the way or the ribbon wouldn't move. So I needed to get the ribbon out of the way because it's attached to the digitizer. Then I used the X-Acto knife for the locks on the connectors, and those just pop straight up into a vertical position. And when that's done, then I was ready to pull off the digitizer, and the ribbon was actually stuck to the housing, and then I also remembered that the home button needed to be taken care of. So I'll zoom in there and show you what I did. So I grabbed the knife again, and there was some tape covering the connection point for that ribbon, and this was a little stickier. It was more difficult to get it off, but I pulled it up out of the way, and then I was trying to hold it back. I wanted to reuse the tape if I could, so I pulled that connection, undid the lock, and I kept that there. Then, as you can see, I had to unglue the ribbon from the base for the rest of the digitizer. And once the ribbon was unattached and disconnected, then I could remove everything out of the way, blow off and get some of that dust and dirt and metal and glass shards everywhere, clean up the area is all I did. I kept the digitizer. I don't know why. I figured I may use it for parts for something. I don't know. Anyway, then I cleared off the screen or the desk and changed my gloves because there were little pieces stuck to it, and I didn't want to accidentally ruin something when I went for the reassembly. So here is the battery and base of the screen or of the iPad and the new digitizer. Again, I'll post a link for that. And so the first thing I did was removed the piece of tape that was holding it in place for that digitizer ribbon, and I tried to make sure that I could line it up with where those digitizer connections needed to be. And I'll show you something that caused me a bit of grief the first time around, and that was in the position of the digitizer ribbons itself. Problem was when I first installed it, as you can see, it was kind of difficult to get it lined up properly. I ended up with the digitizer not working. I was supposed to fully insert these ribbon cables until the lines, and you can see the lines on the ribbon itself. Make sure that they are in the connectors, that they are against the line of where the connectors should be. And I didn't get them fully inserted, and so when I put down the locks and got everything in place, I thought I was good to go. But then later when I first tested it, you'll see that it didn't work. So the next step was put in the home button cable, and that also ended up causing me some grief. It wasn't that day. It was weird that worked, but the digitizer didn't work. So I incorrectly placed the ribbon cable for the home button. You see I'm having some trouble. I wanted to keep that tape in place to cover it, and it just wasn't working, so I pulled the tape out of the way. And then when I got the cable inserted, I had it actually inserted upside down, and so make sure that the home button ribbon matches the path and orientation of the original when you pull it out. Pay attention to that. get your camera out, take pictures, do whatever you need to so that you know. And that's what saved me when my home button stopped working. It was weird. The home button worked the first day, and the ribbon cable or the digitizer didn't. But then the next day, the digitizer worked, and after I fixed it, the home button wasn't working. So I had to take it apart a second time. Anyway, so I placed the LCD screen back in place. I got the screws, and I put in the first screw, and that was fine. And then the next screw, actually, I think I dropped one of them. I dropped on the floor, and I almost lost it. A magnet would be a good thing to have in a case like this, so that you don't lose these teeny tiny little screws. They're probably about a millimeter diameter for the shaft of the screw. Anyway, so after I did put everything in place, then I wanted to clean it all up, make sure that everything was nice and clean. There were some smudges, and it was just dust. And then I wanted to make sure that everything worked. You can see that part there where the bezel was interfering. And then I decided to go ahead and pull off the adhesive backing to try and connect everything. So this was a good learning experience for me, and I'm glad I recorded it so I can help everybody else who wants to undertake this not make the same mistakes I did. I probably should have tested it before pulling off the adhesive backing. I couldn't tell if the ribbon was connected, and then actually when I slammed the desk there, the ribbon for the home button was disconnected. It had popped out because it wasn't in there properly. And so anyway, grab the spudger, undo the screws, get everything out again, work on that. I grabbed my small tweezers, and I was able to get the ribbon back in place where it goes. And again, this would have been a case where testing it before taking off the adhesive backing would have been better, because right now everything was sticking to that adhesive. The ribbons were, my fingers were. It was just the wrong thing to do. I finally got it lined up and put back in place, and it seemed like it was all the way it should be. Still at this point though, if you notice when you see later in the video, you'll notice that I had that home button in backwards. The ribbon was upside down. So there's a certain way that it has to go in order for it to work, and I'll show you that. But anyway, so I got everything put back together. I laid the digitizer down, and one thing that was wrong was I didn't take off the backing. There was a plastic film on the back of the digitizer, which I didn't see, because the digitizer I got had no instructions. So anyway, that was still there, and so I tried to test. I tried to fit everything past that broken area of the frame where I dropped it on the parking lot. So here you see I'm turning on the iPad for the very first time after the new digitizer, and it took a while. It's going. Oh, this was the this was the anxious part. I was so nervous. Is it gonna work? I don't know. So I propped it up with my phone, took off my gloves because I wanted to touch the screen without, and it didn't work. And it didn't work. And oh yes, there's a film. So I thought maybe the film was interfering. The home button seemed to work, but the digitizer didn't work at this point. So I was frustrated, but anyway. So here's what I figured out. There's a certain way that you have to do the digitizer cable, and it comes across the back of the iPad there, it turns and it goes into there. So you've got to make sure that that ribbon is fully inserted so those lines are touching the connection before you put it in. And that's very, very important, because if it's just even slightly not inserted, it won't work. And then about the home button, so here's the home button, and it is connected here, and it goes across the back of the digitizer, and then it has this little flexible area, and then it goes into the connection. Now, the first time I did it, it needed to be proper. So here's the proper orientation. You've got the connection. Make sure that the connector, or that the contacts, the copper side is up facing you, and it goes out and it turns and it goes back the other way, and you'll see that here in a second, and then it comes up into this little tray, and that allows the cable, the ribbon cable, to lie in that area in that little tray without having any trouble. And you can close it, it won't pinch, and you can get everything inserted and closed the way it should be. So it took a while to finally get it to the way that it needed. This I shot the assembly video 2 days ago, and so anyway, here's testing the home button. The home button turns the screen on, and one more time with iOS 10.1 it'll turn on the unlock. So there it is. Here it is all reassembled together, and I'm going to show just a quick little test. Home button works, touch screen works, and home button will go to the unlock. Pan away so you can't see my passcode. Not that it matters, because you're not going to have access to it. Whatever. Anyway, so here it is. I can use the apps. Everything works great. So it's all put back together. So there's a quick video on how I replaced the screen on my iPad Generation 4. As you saw, I did have some issues with it. I'll put a link in the description to the digitizer that I purchased. I don't get anything off of it. It's the one I used, and it had all the tools that came with it. One thing I'll say is some of the plastic tools that were used to separate the screen were kind of flimsy. So, at your own risk. As you saw, I had to use the X-Acto knife that I had with the thin straight blade for scraping off some of the previous adhesive, because it wasn't coming off when I used the heat gun. It was still sticking there, and part of that was because the screen was so cracked and broken, and so there were pieces that needed to be pulled off. Also, I'm going to need to get a bezel that goes around the digitizer, because right now it's not seated exactly where it's supposed to be. I wasn't aware that I was going to destroy it in the process of taking the original one off, so I'm going to get another one and put that on in place of the where I didn't have it, where I don't have it right now, because I've removed it and broke it. So anyway, I got the iPad free, so I'm only into this project about 15 bucks. Thank you for watching this video. Hit the like button if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe so you can catch more videos of where I break things and put it back together. Also, I do Illustrator tutorials, Photoshop tutorials, and other software. I'm working on some tutorials for coming up. I'm also in the process of working on my my doctorate. I'm in the dissertation process, trying to get approval on a project, so I may or may not be posting about that. Definitely will once it's all finished, but in the process, just know that I'm very busy, and I appreciate your views and your support. Thank you. Have a good day.